Before we begin our service, I'll ask everyone to please silence all electronic devices so we'll have proper decorum and dignity during the levaya, during the funeral. We're going to start with the Parak of Tehillim, Parak Chaf Gimel. Mizmor LeDavid, Adonai roi lo echzar, binos deshe yarbitzeni amei menuchos yinaleini. Nafshi yishovev yancheni b'maglei tzedek leman shemo, gam ki elech b'geit zalmaves, lo yiwara ki ato imadi, shivtecha mishantecha heima yanachamuni. Tarug l'fanai shulcha neget zoriroi, dishanta b'shemen roshi kosi rivoyo. Achto v'chesed yidafuni kol yemei chayai, v'shabti v'es Adonai li'orech yamim. We're gathered today to pay our respects to beloved husband, father, grandfather, family member, community member par excellence, Yitzhak ben Yaakov. I read this parak of Tehillim very often when I have the occasion to officiate at a funeral, but I can't think of a moment where it was more appropriate. Because David HaMelech talks about his tremendous lack of fear, his unbelievable emunah and faith. And Yitzchak was an incredibly faithful man who always believed that despite the hardships that he was going through, that he was going to persevere and he was going to survive. And he did, for many years beyond what was expected. And you'd go to see him, how are you, Yitzchak? Everything is fine. The doctors don't understand why I'm alive. And he was going to show them to be wrong. He was a person who did things really for the right reasons, never wanted to draw attention to himself, never with any fanfare. He just did it because it was the right thing to do. And I'd go see him on Thursdays, and I was amazed. On the one hand, we all knew how sick he was, and yet on the other hand, if you spoke to him, you didn't think it was true. He leaves behind a glorious legacy, a wonderful family, a full life, but a life that was too short. Yhi zecha baruch. May his memory be a blessing. We're going to ask to say words of eulogy of Hesped. We're going to first call up his brother Avi, and then call up his 4 children in order, Naftali, Miriam, Roni, and Batya. Avi.
It is now the morning after the midnight long-distance call. These words were written on October 8, 1966, in Geneva, Switzerland, by a man who had a tremendous impact on Itzi's life and many others. And now it is the morning after for Itzi, who received a long-distance call after midnight. These words were addressed to, quote, my dear Wolves and Shermans. They were written by our late uncle Sidney Zeman after his visit to the Polish shtetl from which he came and to the Nazi extermination camps where most of his family lost their lives. The letter, which I hold in my hands here, continued. I think that ever since 1945, when I learned of the faith of my family, I have been wanting to do something about it, and not just grieve in silence and from within. I wanted it to be something drastic, more expressive in my feelings. Over the years, I found that getting myself involved in their memory, in causes which I know they would approve, has provided me with much relief. End of quote. In those projects, it seems was a fearsome determination that the surviving families in the United States and in Israel will not only be highly educated, but also will stay connected. This is probably a major part of the reason why Itzi, me, and many other Israeli cousins were invited by Uncle Sidney's family to study in Case Western Reserve in Cleveland, starting in the early 1950s. This is how Itzi came to Cleveland. Who was Itzi? Itzi was named after his grandfather, Uncle Sidney's father, who was gassed to death at the Majdanek death camp near Lublin. Our family that stayed in Poland survived in the Warsaw Ghetto until the Ghetto Rebellion in April 1943. Yitzhak Zemelman's daughter, the grandfather, the daughter Golda died fighting the Nazis in the ghetto in Mila 18. My brother Itzi and I grew up together in Israel, along with our sister Sarah, who is 10 years older than us boys. Itzi and I were very good friends. The country was young. Our parents, Jacob and Shoshana, Zichronam Livracha, emphasized education, and we went to the same elementary school for many years. One day when I was in the 6th grade, I was beaten up pretty severely by a brutal teacher. Itzi was sitting in the 7th grade class across the corridor, saw this, and did not hesitate. He jumped on that teacher, wrestled him to the ground. It's true. He was fearless already back then. We grew up near a major hill in Bnei Brak, city near Tel Aviv. I remember that Itzi and his friends dug into the hillside to create a large cave. They covered the inside walls with cement that they acquired from an adjacent construction site. I remember that Itzi and his group put a dog in that cave to guard it from, quote, invaders, and camouflaged the entry with tree branches. Itzi had a drive to build back then. In high school, it became evident that Itzi had a unique talent. He could look at any object from two sides and draw in 3 dimensions what this object would look like from any other direction. His drawing teacher used to come to him for help whenever they needed to draw very complicated structures. Therefore, it was quite natural that when the time came to join the Israeli Defense Forces at the age of 18, the Israeli Air Force sought him out. Itzi was assigned to a group of a highly technical staff that used an electronic lab mounted on a sizable truck that was continuously driven to service and calibrate all the radar sites around the country, particularly the radars of the Hawk anti-aircraft missiles. I just wonder if his talents were needed these days up there again when so many missiles are aiming at Israel. When the Yom Kippur War broke out, Itzi and his crew were fixing highly advanced radar systems in Hashiba, the front command and control center of the Israeli Southern Command, located in the mountains about 10 miles from the Suez Canal. The Egyptians knew the importance of that site and struck it on the first day of the war with a barrage of Scud missiles and a major commando attack force. These missiles killed half of Itzi's crew, who were outside their truck. Itzi was inside the truck and was saved. But what he saw when he stepped out traumatized him for life. We knew that something happened to him during that war, but he refused to talk about it. Only when we sat alone in the hospice room a few weeks ago, he told me what happened there, and he was weeping uncontrollably from those memories. Itzi, in his own quiet way, was a patriot and a hero who was adamant about keeping Israel secured and safe, willing not only to put in 4 years of his prime days in the service of his beloved country, but also to put his life on the line so that the Jewish people will hold to the promised land. Yitzhak never ever believed in the proposition that one could build lasting political structures on shifting soil, irrespective of the elegance of the designs and the strength of the foundations. He also was a fighter who never gave up and stayed optimistic under terrible circumstances, a trait that always stayed with him. And then we came to America. We've never been outside of Israel before. When we first visited Case Western in May 1975, the international student advisors told us that, quote, "It is nice that you boys are here, but you cannot study at Case. Your SAT math scores are high, but your English is so poor that you will not understand what is happening in the classroom." Itzi looked at her and said, "What? We speak English good. No problem. We will learn English hard during the summer." The advisor liked that attitude, called around, and found a strong English program at Boston University. Itzi looked at the advisor and said, "Where is Boston?" She showed him on the map. After an intensive English summer course in Boston, during which we all learned how to sail boats on the Charles River and explored Mount Tecumseh in New Hampshire with Gary Yarrows, we returned to Case. School was hard. We used to record every class and later listen to the tapes at home. Itzi was doing my technical drawings. I was doing his chemistry problem sets. 4 years later, Itzi received an electrical engineering degree with distinction. Thereafter, he used that degree for 10 years, developing CAT scans and MRI machines for the benefits of humanity. At this point, Itzi met Shelley. I can go on forever with stories, but I think that Itzi's children, who will speak shortly, will bring many more aspects of Itzi's life that they've observed over the years. I would like to conclude with a powerful parable that will illustrate who Itzi really was. It will overshadow anything that I've said so far. Our sages told the story of a wealthy person who lived in the land of a powerful king. It was not a good idea to receive an invitation to this king's palace. So that man operated, quote, under the radar and prospered quietly. One day, when that man was fairly old and very comfortable, he heard a knock on his door. It was an agent of the king's secret police ordering him to appear at the palace in 10 days. The man understood the meaning of that invitation and immediately started to reach out to his extensive network of friends and associates, asking them to accompany him to his meeting with the king. They all refused. They said, "It was nice that we had good times together and that we did business together, but it is just too dangerous to go in front of the king." So the man turned to his family and pleaded with them to accompany him to the king. "Oh no, father," they all said, "we cannot do that. It is too dangerous. We of course appreciate all that you have done for us, and we are willing to go with you all the way to the gate of the palace, but we will not stop. But we will stop there. We will not go in." The man was distraught. He was out of ideas about what else to do. The next morning, he was supposed to go to meet the king at the palace. At midnight, he heard a knock on his door. Trembling with fear, he opened the door. There stood a person he has not seen in 20 years. That person was a well-to-do former neighbor who fell on very hard times 20 years ago. And at that time, that wealthy old man helped his neighbor to get back on his feet, and that neighbor became eventually very successful again and well connected to the king. "I will help you," said the old neighbor. I will go with you in front of the king and I will intercede on your behalf. This is the parable. The moral of the parable is that we, busy and productive individuals, will inevitably be called to meet our Maker, the King of Kings. We will tend to call first upon for help those we believe to be our best friends, our assets. But they will tell us that they will not accompany us to the meeting. They will stay put right here in this world. Our family will accompany us to the gate of the palace, the cemetery, but we'll stop there. Only our good deeds will be there at the end to accompany us and intercede on our behalf when we meet the ultimate king. Itzi was above all about good deeds. All those who knew Itzi well recognize his good heart, his chesed, his stretched hand, his extending himself to help other people, to advise them, to make them feel good about themselves, and to encourage them to believe in themselves. A month ago, after Itzi had a stroke, which impaired his vision, I called him from Israel to strengthen his spirits. I remember from that conversation only 3 things that Itzi said to me. Quote, "Ma shlomcha?" How are you? He is asking me. "Yeh beseder," it'll be all right. "Toda rabba," thank you. This was his incredible nature. The pilot on the El Al plane that will take Itzi to be buried in Israel will likely feel that the plane is flying much easier than usual. There will be thousands of little angels that were created by Itzi's many good deeds that will put their little shoulders under the plane's wing to help bring Itzi back to the land he loved so much. We will always love you, Itzi. We will always remember you.
There's so many great things that I could say about my father, but for now, I'd like to focus on his kindness and compassion for others. He had a deep-seated love for family and community. He was always looking out for those around him. He loved going to shul, and some of my best memories are walking with him to shul on Erev Shabbat in the summertime. He really showed a deep sense of caring for the welfare of others, and those who knew him well understood this. I remember one Friday night when he brought back 2 Argentinian students who were in town studying in college for a Shabbat dinner. This would be the beginning of a long relationship with them, and they would be frequent guests at our Shabbat table for the rest of their stay in Cleveland. And a few years later, we even received an invitation to one of their weddings. The Jewish precept of Ve'afta l'reacha kamocha, loving your neighbor as yourself, was deeply ingrained within him. He was the most incredible son-in-law to my grandfather Zaidi, who really considered him as a father. He was always looking for ways to help in every facet of my grandfather's life, be it helping him pay bills, fixing things around the house, or just sharing a good Jewish joke. A few years ago when my grandfather got sick, my father was there with them, spending every minute, and he was always right there by his side. My father set a wonderful example that I will carry with me wherever I go. I love you, Abba.
Transitioning your relationship with your parents as you become an adult is complicated. For the child, and I guess for the parent too. My dad in particular sometimes seemed reluctant to let go of how things were when we were little. We were always his babies. In our consciousness, mine and my siblings, as they'll tell you, this is a clear image of my dad, perpetually eager to nurture, to protect, to provide, and I suppose wary of our ever-developing independence. But there was a conversation I had with him that was an exception to this rule, that teaches you something about the rule, to use a literal translation of the Hebrew version of that expression, and about the person who lived the rule and yielded to the exception. I was in my mid-20s already and visiting my parents on Pesach, and I was in a very unhappy relationship. I was struggling to restyle my life in a way that would make things work. My parents could see all of that without me saying a word about it. One Yontif afternoon, as my dad and I were tagging along behind the rest of the family, our conversation turned to how I was doing and what he could do about it. He told me that if this is the person I want to be with, he would do whatever he could to help me make things work. But if he wasn't, and if I wasn't happy, I was going to need to make some hard decisions. He wasn't going to tell me what to do, but he was going to back me up on whatever I decided. I think I can trace a course from that talk through the decisions I made about my future afterwards, and to meeting the love of my life, Shuval, and starting a family with him. It was an uncharacteristic acknowledgement that I was at an age where I was in uncompromised control of my decisions. Though I was surprised to hear my dad admit it, I suppose I was aware of that. But it was also a reminder that the stakes were high for him too. I need to play my cards right, not only for myself, but because my dad was always all in on whatever hand I had. In some ways, it made perfect sense for my father to recognize this control. Thinking about his life these past days and weeks, he was nothing if not someone who took control of his destiny. Ask everyone, he would always tell me, and then do what you want. He'd had a modest childhood in Bnei Brak, Israel. The stories he told us about those days always played upon an unending tension in my father's personality between his natural inclination for being a goody two-shoes and his relentless fascination with chutzpah. He worked hard in school to get good grades, but if you were a teacher he didn't like, he and a couple of friends were going to go out to the parking lot and manually hoist your small car onto a row of cinder blocks. After serving in the Israeli Air Force, which took him through a darker time he told us little about, fighting in the Yom Kippur War, he set off for America, and with the help of our family here, took hold of all that it promised: a prestigious education, a career, the opportunity for entrepreneurship. He fell in love with my mom, and together they raised a family, which was always the focus in his life, nurturing us, providing for us, protecting us, and guiding us. When he was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer more than 3 years ago, the doctors gave him weeks to live. But he was in control, not the disease, and not the doctors. He was going to fight and to win. And in many ways, he did. He lived another 3 beautiful years, during which I think many people had no idea that he was sick, during which he was a proud father at our wedding and became an even prouder grandfather when Ella was born. But being in control of your destiny can be lonely and sometimes scary, and my dad knew that part too. I guess what he wanted for us was to give us the independence and teach us to use it right, but to protect us from the downsides and the risks. That part he always wanted to bear for us. So Abba, I need to tell you now that we've got this. It's true that the stakes might be higher than ever, but you taught us to take care of ourselves and to take care of each other and of Ima. You have guided us this way in the past, and I know that you will guide us this way in the future. We love you.
As was already pointed out and emphasized, there was nothing that animated my dad, energized him, or lifted his spirits more than being our Abba. He loved to use his pragmatic, analytical, and problem-solving mind to help us. And I have two quick stories from the last year that capture this. The weekend before he was hospitalized for the last time, I FaceTimed him as opposed to calling him, and was a bit taken aback this time by the physical toll the disease had taken on him. I froze for a moment, not knowing how or when to address the elephant in the room, as my father's, against all odds, incredible war with cancer was undeniably changing. Naturally, however, my father had seized the mic, as word had gotten back to him that I had a minor stomach bug earlier that week. He then decided to dictate the tone and the content of the conversation, asking me how I felt, offering suggestions to ease discomfort, and making me assure him that I'm feeling okay and yes, can continue with my studies and I don't need help right now. I indulged him and allowed him to do what gives him the most joy. Be my Abba. Try in his own way to take care of me and show that he cares. Only by the end of the conversation did I finally pipe in and asked how he's doing. He begrudgingly, this time, acknowledged that the latest treatment was a bit rough, but as always, everything was going to be okay. When I was told a week later that doctors said that there were only days left, I took a red-eye flight with multiple stops from Tel Aviv to Cleveland, which lasted close to 30 hours door to door. When I finally arrived, Batya and others informed me that Abba kept on repeating to all those in the hospice that I need to make sure Roni gets some sleep. I need to make sure Roni gets some sleep. And as I promised him, I went straight to sleep when I got home. There was nothing more beautiful and inspiring than to see my father rise to the occasion as Abba. And it was a badge of honor he took with him and fought to hold on to until our final moments together. It's no wonder that he defied doctors once again to spend another 3 weeks, not mere days, together with his family in the hospice. On behalf of my family, I just want to say that we've learned so much about my father, not just from his behavior, but from watching his relationships with his closest friends as well, who reflect his character far greater than any words can. We want to express our Kara Tov to so many people who have been so kind to my dad and the rest of our family over this difficult period. On behalf of my family, I want to thank my dad's buddies, Tibor and Irene and Boaz and Shani, who visited him every single Shabbat, especially in his final months, no matter what the weather conditions were. My parents' friends truly embody my father's greatest traits: friendship, humility, loyalty, and they stand by my family in both joyous and difficult times without any fanfare or limelight.
It took me hours of staring at a blank document for me to even begin writing this to you. And I realize it's because how do I even say goodbye to you, Abba? You were my protector and caregiver for everything. Being the youngest of 4 children definitely had its pros and cons, but the relationship it created for my father and me was special. Even just a few weeks ago, he would introduce me as his baby at the age of 21, and I was okay with it. At younger ages, I sometimes resented him for this. I just saw him as being strict and overprotective, but over the last few years, I learned to really appreciate it. I distinctly remember a few years ago complaining about some minor heartburn I was having, and my father insisted on rushing me to the emergency room. This just showed how the thought of any of his children in any type of pain was not a thought he could bear. He was always putting his family first, time and time again. He proved this even more over his final weeks. All he seemed to be concerned about was his family's safety and happiness, and not his own condition. Losing you, Abba, is the most difficult thing I've ever had to go through. There are no words to express your influence on my life. You completely devoted your life to making sure we were all happy. You've taught me so many things that I will carry with me forever. You taught me to be tough and persevere. You taught me to never settle if I was unhappy. You taught me to always keep my head up through anything. And most importantly, you taught me that there's never a wrong time for some chocolate cake.
At this point, I'm going to ask everyone to please rise for the saying of the Kalmale. I'd like to call up close family friend Mike Schlavinger to lead us in the memorial prayer.
El molei rachamim sholchach beveina bamaromim hametzei menucha nechana aval al kanefei ashchino b'malos kedoshim utehorim Kizoar orokia mazirim Ese nishmas Yitzhak ben Yaakov sheholach le'olam Ba'avur she'anachanu mispalelim b'yad askoraseni yishmo vaso Began Eden tehem menuchaso Lochein ba'al rachamim Yastireu b'seiser kenofov li'olamim v'yitzrar b'yitzrar achayim ese nishmaso Adonai hu nachalo vaso v'yonuach b'shalom B'shalom al mishkavo V'nomar amen.
You may be seated. This concludes the Levaya, the funeral that were taking place here in America. As is noted, Yitzhak will be going to Israel to be buried. The funeral will take place tomorrow evening at the Eitz HaChaim Cemetery in Beit Shemesh at 7 p.m. We'll send out notices. Please inform people in Israel as well so they can pay their proper respects. The family will be starting Shiva once the funeral is concluded at their home, 2491 Brentwood. At the moment, there will just be visiting hours, 9 to 12, 2 to 5, and 7 to 9. And then when Roni and Naftali come back on Thursday, we'll start minyanim at that point as well.